はじめまして、私はベロニカです。I'm so fascinated with Japanese culture. In fact, did you know that back in the Edo period, Japan closed its borders for 214 years? That's when they developed their rich culture. And out came Japanese ceramics, Japanese flower arrangement, Japanese food, and sake. Hey, speaking of sake, we're going to meet a modern samurai right now who's going to teach me all about the history of sake. Let's go. Hi, Elliot. You're our sake samurai. Nice to meet you.
So glad to be here. Well, I mean, I'm always here, so yeah, I'm glad you're here.
A lot of us are very interested in sake, but we never know enough about it. What is a sake samurai? I've never heard of that. Can you explain that? And what is your passion towards sake?
Well, first of all, I love Japanese culture from being a child, playing video games, reading manga. We had an exchange student stay with us. And then later on, as I started to get more involved in food culture, I studied to become a sommelier. And then I moved to Hong Kong, and I had a really kind of sudden opportunity to grow a passion for sake. So after working in a restaurant, developing the beverage programs there and focusing on sake, I had an opportunity to write a book.
Oh.
I wrote this book about sake, and thankfully it got great recognition from the community and the sake industry. And at that point, I was chosen by a panel, the Japan National Brewers Association Junior
That's not
Council.
easy to get into. There's about only like 100 people for this program, right?
They have to get together every year and they have to vote on who they think could be a sake samurai. It was a huge honor. And I take it very seriously. We went to 75 breweries in 19 days, all the way from Okinawa to Hokkaido. And you know, I got to choose all the breweries. I did the whole travel itinerary. My spiritual homeland for sake is a small town called Akashi.
Oh.
Akashi is in Hyogo Prefecture. So Hyogo is kind of next to, just a little bit to the west of Kyoto and heading towards Osaka. Hyogo is where some of the best Yamada Nishiki rice comes from, and that's like me telling you if it's wine, it's where the best Cabernet Sauvignon comes from. So it's a prized rice variety, and it's where the best rice is coming from.
The rice really makes a difference, right?
Absolutely. The original kind of development of sake culture all started from this communal chewing and spitting out of rice into this pot that would eventually ferment and react with the different bacteria and mold in the air, which have now all been kind of modernized and broken down into the key ingredients of sake, which are koji mold and yeast. Rice is critical in sake production, but the truth is that a lot of the work of making sake taste how it does happens in the brewery. So there's a lot of things that the sake maker can do depending on what style of sake they want to make. So yes, rice is important, but it's what you do with the rice, and then how you implement the other key ingredients of koji mold and yeast, the main ingredients for sake outside of water. What are you going to do with those once you've got them all together? And that will define how your sake is going to taste.
So let's talk about the history of sake more. So back then you said it used to be only drinks for the royals, right?
Yeah.
And now how did it transit towards commoners?
Well, it was royals and for religious ceremonies. So much like beer production and wine with their role in history, it was always originally like a religious connotation, or it would be made by the church or by the shrine or by the monks. And sake has a very similar history in that respect. Eventually, the production of sake was passed down to more cottage industries, artisans, farmers, people that started to make sake for more than just royalty and for religious, but they started to enjoy it their own. So the start of the sake season is October 1st officially. That's World Sake Day. Technically, people make sake all year round, but a lot of that historical reference that I'm talking about before still resonates today because a lot of the breweries are centuries-old breweries. They've owned their land for just as long, and they don't necessarily put in modern refrigeration. So the reason that the sake season starts in October 1st is because that's kind of the beginning of winter. And in order for your sake to have a long, healthy fermentation, you need cold temperatures.
So Elliot, how far has sake come from back then to the present?
If you consider that over 2,000-year history and starting in China, you know, and look at where we are today. You know, certain things such as the principle and the philosophy of making sake have really not changed. There have been some modern innovations, but a lot of the structure and the way that people approach sake making still calls on teachings that are from before the 19th century.
And now you can drink sake anytime you want.
Anytime,
right?
anywhere.
Back then it wasn't like that.
Absolutely.
Is the Hong Kong people more receptive to a certain type of sake?
Absolutely, but you know, Hong Kong people should be proud because we are the largest market for sake in the world right now. And you know, like for me, that makes me proud because I've been hustling here for 10 years trying to get people to enjoy sake. But you know, one of the challenges is that people have a preconceived notion about what sake they should be drinking. A great example is Junmai Daiginjo. This is a category that is really important in the sake world. Yeah. I think it's worth showing you because these characters here, you know, it's something that really kind of shows quality and shows as being premium and pure. But the problem is that if you buy a sake that doesn't have this character of pure, that doesn't have this quality of premium and processing, if these two characters are gone, you're going to think you're buying an inferior product, right?
Yes.
Because it's not there. Oh, it's not pure. It's not extra, right? But does that mean it's not as good? Well, the fact is, no. It just is telling you that they didn't go through the same processing methods to make the same sake, but the flavor, the components, and the balance, and all of the work that went into making the sake is still there.
Wow, this looks delicious.
Yeah.
Thank you. ありがとうございます.
Right here, katsusando, classic staple of Japanese food culture. You know, this is something that we had to have here. This is an ascolana. Ascolana is something from Tuscany, right? And it's just ground beef, fried, and then we kind of dress it up a little bit with some caviar on top to bring that salty, briny character. This is caviar toast with finger lime and also with a nori brioche that our Italian chef bakes in-house.
Because usually when we have sake, it goes with traditional Japanese food or sushi.
Yeah.
So is there a reason why you chose to pair this with Italian food?
Why do we have to have sake with sushi and Japanese food if we can have pizza in Okinawa and we can have a bottle of wine with our sushi? You know, there's no rules. Here we make food for the sake, and that's kind of the beauty.
I noticed that behind you there's a lot of different cups.
Yeah. Traditionally, people were drinking out of masu. They were drinking out of the
ceramics,
ochoko,
right?
the ceramics, the small little cups. Sake, one thing for sure, is that it's meant to be shared. It's meant to be a communal drink, and that's why the cups are so small. You know, you can kind of keep pouring, enjoying. There's a social mechanism to the enjoyment of sake that supersedes kind of the history or the production methods.
How would you pair the sake with the main course?
Usually, at the later part of the meal, the flavors are more rich and more heavy. So the type of sake that we're going to recommend is the sake that's going to be more rich and more heavy. Usually something in the junmai category. Could be a yamahai, which is a certain style that has a lot of umami and acid and kind of more funky flavors. That's kind of good later on. But then at the beginning of the meal, that's when we're having our vegetables, our raw dishes, sashimi kind of stuff. And that's where we bust out the Junmai Daiginjo for those more delicate, lighter, and aromatic styles of sake. And you know, to bring it all full circle, talking about hot sake, which you know, like I'm saying, could be warm sake, room temperature sake, body temperature sake. You know, using those different temperatures, usually we'll do something a little bit more kind of cold and crisp to heighten that sense of acidity at the beginning, focusing on those more aromatic and delicate Junmai Daiginjo. And then we'll work our way up. And once we hit the katsusando equivalent of the main part of the meal, that's when you get those kind of more warmer sake that can really open up the richness and bond with the flavors that are inside the food. The flavors of sake and the actual chemical makeup of sake allows for us to be a little bit more flexible with the flavors that we're pairing.
When you go into a fine dining restaurant, the food and wine pairing is already set. If you order fish, it's going to pair with a white wine, never red. But after talking to Elliot and knowing the history of sake, it opened my eyes to realize that sake is so versatile. It's so versatile, you can pair it with anything you like. And traditionally speaking, it has a social element to it. So it makes it much more easier to appreciate.